Hey minions, welcome to Crank It Up. I'm Jim Price and today I'll be talking about 3-player Smash Up. Very often with this channel, I take a 2-player perspective because it offers the most certainty in an uncertain game. But contrary to what you expect, I do enjoy 3-player on occasion if it's under the right circumstances. I believe that there are some problems that 2-player solves that are introduced by multiplayer, and I think there are some problems that multiplayer solves that are introduced by 2-player. It really depends on what you're looking to get out of the game and what you're in the mood for. Sometimes the approach has to be drastically different for 3 players, and often that could be a good thing because it trades one type of intrigue and one set of problems for another. Today I'll be talking about 6 ways that I think multiplayer is a good thing with respect to 3 players. The first one that I want to talk about is the actual quantity of bases. If you play 3 players, you'll be playing with 4 instead of 3, which is in 2-player. I actually think that it would be good if Smash Up always had 4 bases. I'd be perfectly fine if they changed that rule and adjusted the base count. In a surprising amount of time, I've had 3 ninja bases out at the same time. I've definitely had 2 ninja bases out and an undesirable base, maybe a 4-3-2. I've had many 4-3-2 bases where they covered the spread. This happens when you have only 3 bases. You also run the risk that if you're playing against an area control faction, if the base provides an automatic form of area control, like an ice castle, all you have to do is lock out the others, and you run the risk of creating a potentially unplayable game state. That's never really a good thing, and it's not fun when you can't take your turn. Simply by including one more base, you prevent that, but you also offer a more strategic advantage because you now have one more place to go. It means that you have a better chance at getting a good spread because you want those type of bases, especially in multiplayer. Most bases have a 4-2-1 layout or a 5-3-2 layout where there's a different value point at each winning slot, and that's a good thing because it means that you're actually competing for something. When you're competing for a 4-2-2 base, whether or not you're playing for second or third doesn't really matter. You're getting 2 points either way. So you want to give as many chances as possible to get that normalized spread without the number of bases going crazy, and I think 4 happens to be the perfect number. So right out of the gate, that's one thing that 3-player does very well. Another thing that it does is it forces you to prioritize yourself and focuses less on hurting other people. This is because very often destruction doesn't often scale for every player in the game. If it did, it could get annoying very quickly, and you can just create one person who's taking away everything that everyone else is doing, and that wouldn't be fun. When you only can attack one player at a time, in 2 players, that offers a lot of min-maxing opportunity. Everything that I do to hurt you is helping me because I'm slowing you down, my only opponent. That's true to an extent. There are times when I could actually prefer to use your power against you, something I talk about all the time, but that doesn't really work in 3 players. If I hit the next player, okay, I've slowed them down, but I haven't done anything about the player to my right, and I have to make sure that I'm prioritizing myself and using my opportunities to burst myself and put myself into first. I can't really just slow you down. A great example of this is with the kitty cats. In 2-player, you really want to get out that Queen Fluffy and Whiskers combo because you can prevent someone from playing a minion every turn. Well, that doesn't really work in 3 players because I may stop you, but I'm not necessarily stopping the other person. So I have to change my strategy to see, okay, how can I steal? How can I be efficient? How can I be faster? Because the gameplay is fundamentally different. I can't just beat you till you're down and you're out of resources because I have another player that I have to contend with. So by prioritizing yourself, it feels good. It takes away some of the take that nature of the game, especially if you're being competitive about it. You're focused on, okay, I see an opportunity to break a base, let's do it. It creates the minion removal through the actual breaking of bases, which progresses the game, and that's a very good thing. The next thing that I really like about 3 players is that it actually creates the 3-player slot for scoring for obvious reasons. I'm a big fan of second place strategies. Very often I will talk about if I have a chance to just get second place with 1 minion and I know that you're going to not be able to kick me off, I'm just going to settle for that and I'm not going to even try. Well, I can't do that right out of the gate. I have to decide, well, do I really want second or do I want third? One of the worst things that you can do is overpay for second place. It's even worse when you're overpaying for third place. You have to be very careful. But now you also have twice the minion removal. Even though I just talked about prioritizing yourself, there are times when you can strategically hurt someone else and swing a base at the same time. And I'll have an example about that in a little bit. So I have to think, okay, is 1 minion enough to guarantee myself 1 point or 2 points on a 5-3-2 base? Is 2 minions enough? Well, two minions is enough to guarantee you third place, but is it really worth it for only 1 point? Would you be better off forfeiting that point if it means that you can win a base or possibly solo it elsewhere? That's a very interesting decision. It's different from the usual game plan, but it's one that I do enjoy, and it's introduced by the nature of third player. Related to that, the fourth point where it gets interesting is specials. Specials are always interesting because it changes the base at the most critical moment. Base is going to score regardless. It doesn't matter what happens. In 2-player, specials are really interesting because it's either I'm going to overtake you or I'm not. I'm not going to play them unless I know that I have a realistic chance of overtaking you. Usually, if it's certain, I'm definitely going to do it. But if you might have specials, then I'll be a little bit more conservative in what I want to do. I'll think about, okay, is it really worth it? What's the odds that he could have the card that will counter what I'm trying to do? Well, in multiplayer, you have to ask yourself a question. Is it worth going from third to second? If you can go from second to first, absolutely, go ahead and do that. But third to second, that's only 1 point, but it's in a game that's short where every point matters. You have to think, okay, how much is that 1 point going to pay down dividends? And do I need to be concerned about the fact that I'm also taking away a point from someone else? I can't stop the fact that someone's going to get 4 points or more being in first, but I could hurt someone else. In terms of overall economy, am I trying to maximize my points or minimize points of my opponents at the same time? It's a very interesting question. Personally, I don't really like to go from third to second unless I know that it's going to win me the game in the near future. Either right then, which I'll definitely do it because winning the game should trump everything, or if I feel like I have another play already lined up on another base and that extra point is going to push me over the finish line. Other than that, I feel like I'm wasting my opportunity to take away and influence more points later on, and I'm content to hold on to those specials until the moment that I deem necessarily. But not a lot of people play that way, and that question is only introduced in multiplayer because, again, you're really saying how far up the chain do I want to go? Going from third to first, now that's incredibly risky. If you could line that up, hats off to you. But it doesn't happen that much because it means that everybody is going to be in close contention. But again, it's really interesting because you have to say, all right, if everybody's in close contention and I can go from third to first, well, can they play a special that could potentially overtake me and then bump me back down to second? It means that I have to know, basically double the number of decks and be prepared for what other people are planning for. And that's a good thing. The fifth thing that I find really interesting is the fact that there are inevitably going to be temporary alliances. Now, let me be clear. This can be a very bad thing, and I'm used to the temporary alliance being against me. It's just, it comes with the territory. But I grew up playing Risk, and temporary alliances were part of the deal. You knew that they were coming and they were part of the fun. I think there is a place for temporary alliances. If someone won the first 2 bases, you really want to try and stop them from winning the third one and knocking them down, potentially into first place, from first to third. It doesn't always work out that way, but you know that by pushing someone else out of first, you might be pushing someone else who's not you into first, and those points are going to come back to haunt you. Maybe there's enough of a gap where you can absorb the ratio, and you just really need to make sure that someone else doesn't advance too much. You don't care about that other person. Temporary alliances can play out in a lot of form. Where I'm not as keen on temporary alliances is where I feel like I should win and the game is just being perpetuated because someone else doesn't want to lose. And by someone else's constant interference, they don't have a chance of winning. They just don't want me to win. But that's really more of a player problem than a game problem, even though the game facilitates that a lot. An example of where a temporary alliance could be meaningful is where I was talking about where you could potentially kick someone else off for points. I was playing in a Gen Con tournament a couple of years ago, and I'm in the finals. And the base is Mushroom Kingdom, which is 5-3-2, and I'm in first at the moment. But it's very close, and someone's about to play Hidden Ninja to play Tiger Assassin, and just by virtue of playing Tiger Assassin, then they're going to overtake me for first. The deck that I'm playing is Zombie Dinosaurs, and I have no specials. I can't possibly swing the game at all. So he's going to get first just by adding 4 power. But the difference is that he really wanted to attack me because I'm in first. But I convinced him to actually attack the other player because he only had a brownie on the base. And if he did, he would prevent someone else from getting 2 points. He was afraid that he was going to discard a card. I convinced him that I'm also going to discard a card, and I don't care, I'm willing to do that. we have to try and keep his point total down, because you could hurt me, but it's not going to do anything. I'm being honest about the fact that I have no other specials. But this is really an opportunity to keep his point total down. Lo and behold, I convinced him that's what he did, and a player lost out on 2 points. But he did draw a card, and we discarded one. I ended up winning the game. Honestly, I can't remember whether or not that 2 points was meaningful. I doubt it was. But in the moment, I felt really proud about myself because I was able to convince him for that point swing. And objectively, I would say that that was the right move. If I was in that position, I would absolutely do that. I wouldn't question it. Would I discard a card in order to cost you 2 points and someone else discard a card? Absolutely, I'm going to do that. That's really interesting when it comes to temporary alliances. The final thing I want to talk about with 3-player is probably the hardest to prove, but it's something that's very important. And that's that broken is a lot harder to be broken. In 2-player, because you have so much certainty over your turn, because bases take longer to break, because you have more card draw, because there are more turns typically, as in the player gets more turns, it's much easier to do what you're trying to do, and therefore broken will be broken. Because bases are breaking faster, because you have the ability to have a temporary alliance against someone, it's really hard for something to be as broken as it is going to be in 2-player. Yes, things can be broken, but it's a lot harder. So an example of this might be pirates and Giant Ant Pirates or Mad Scientist Pirates. Because in 2-player, you can take your time, and you need the ants and the pirates need time in order to build up their first mates. Well, they don't have as much time in 3-player because their minions are moving around and there's twice the number of turns before you get back to your turn. Additionally, you're dealing with potentially twice the number of destruction because you have to contend with the destruction from this person and the destruction from this person. It's much more likely. Now, I don't necessarily consider Giant Ant Pirates to be broken, but it proves a point that, what seems like it's broken is going to be harder in 3-players. When I can do nothing and just blow you away with robots, that's going to be very powerful in 2-players. But in 3-players, I can't necessarily do that because, this other person can increment. I may throw on one minion here or there, but then the other person can explode, and all of a sudden, I'm in third, especially because of the robot's low power. While that does free me up for my burst elsewhere, unless they're setting me up, I can't just keep doing the same things over and over again without a really fantastic draw. I've talked to other people about this. They feel the same way, that things tend to be more broken in 2-players than it is in 3-players, and that's a good thing. It's an important consideration. If you want to have a game with some of these more potent combinations, consider doing it in 3-player and giving everybody an equal access to the same parity. That way, it's not so much subject to the random draw. Everyone else has equal power, access to their power, and you may get that, they each cancel each other out. Because as I said, broken is a lot harder to be broken in 3-players. I know I talk about 2-players a lot. It is still my preferred player count. The majority of my games are going to be that. I basically want to know, when something's strong, how does it do in 2-players? Because it's less about the player and more about the actual factions. But there are times where I want to deviate from that. There are times where I want to have a locked-in battle with 2 great opponents. For the reasons that I just mentioned, 3-players can be very interesting, and it's one of the reasons why I still try and play it today, even if I don't get to play it as much as I probably should. That's not saying the same thing about 4-players, but we're here to talk about 3. I know many of you favor 3-players over 2-players. Tell me in the comments why you think that is and why it's your preferred player count. Sometimes it's just maybe you don't have access to one person, you always have access to 2 people. That's a perfectly valid conclusion, but I think that many of you objectively enjoy 3-player better, and I want to know why in the comments. Thanks so much for watching. Let's shut it down.